Good evening, everybody. My name is Jason. I'm a second-year engineering science student at the University of Toronto, and today I'll be talking about my experiences and my reflections on the course ESC 101, also known as Praxis I. Today is December 18th, 2021, so I'm doing this recap a little bit late compared to when I took the course, which was fall of 2020. I'm recording this video because normally I would still be in exam season, but since the university has shut down until February, for now at least, um, I have the time to record this video. But anyways, without further ado, what is ESC 101? Well, as I mentioned, it's a year one fall course in the engineering science program at U of T. It's compulsory for all Eng students. When I took the course, we had four professors, I should say. The course instructors were Professor Patricia Sheridan and Professor Robert Irish. We also had a professional language instructor, Professor Penny Kinnear, and a design studio instructor, Professor Philip Asare. The lead studio instructor was Matthew Strohack. So the main course topics were, and I'll just show you all of them right now, but a lot of them were focused around the theory of, sort of engineering design. So, for example, the models for design, such as PIA, Rosen modeling relation, the Perry model for intellectual and ethical development. These are frameworks for thinking, in a sense. So PIA stands for perceive, interpret, assess, and act. It's not really specific to engineering, but these are just frameworks for like how you approach problems and how you conceptualize the world around you. The Toolman model is just a nice model for arguments that is applicable to any sort of writing. FDCR, that's probably like one of the biggest things you learn in the course. In fact, the whole course is structured around it, as I'll explain in the next slide. But essentially, it's an engineering design process that stands for frame, diverge, converge, and represent. It goes hand in hand with the requirements model as well as scoping and framing. And that creates a pretty complete design framework. Complete in the sense that it covers all your bases, but maybe there's a lot of room for individual like personalization based off of the kind of work that you do. We also talk about DFX, which is very closely related to your values. Designing for usability, accessibility, all these sorts of things. We also talk about divergence and convergence tools to make informed decisions during the design process, such as using pew charts, Scamper, morph chart, etc. Excuse me. When talking about doing research, we also talked about the craft test, which is to check for whether a source is reliable or not. And then we also talk a little bit about, some psychology topics like cognitive bias, which is, always interesting to think about when you're doing design work. So as I mentioned on the last slide, FDCR is really a key concept in this course, and it's so embedded that you can see it in this visual structure of praxis that was provided by our course instructors last year. And essentially what it says is that in this course we do some, first of all, like theoretical like training when it comes to engineering design. So we learn about these different design frameworks, and then we jump into some practical assignments where we have these sprints. In each of these sprints, we do one stage of FDCR, frame, diverge, or converge. And then, step number 3, they say, is the final. It's funny because the final is just a written exam. It sort of integrates your conceptual knowledge with like a practical understanding of engineering design. So they do give you like, or they did give us like case studies, I guess. for engineering. Um, so yeah, it was like a way that we could apply our theoretical knowledge. So now I'll get more into the course structure with the assessments. So our first assignment was a personal engineering recommendation, where essentially we talked about, we just made a recommendation for ourselves on any topic using some uh, of our knowledge of the requirements model. And personally, I made a recommendation on what major I should choose in my third year. If you're curious, I settled on biomed, but maybe future me is listening and shaking their head right now. But we'll see, I guess. In the first sprint, we did framing. By the way, I should mention that for each of the sprints, we're put into different teams for the duration of the sprint. And these teams were essentially made by grouping people based off of their responses to this one questionnaire at the start of the term, which is, an interesting way to make teams, but, you know, there's probably no better way to do it. Not that I would know of, anyways. Anyways, during the framing sprint, we wrote a design brief, and my group wrote a design brief on an opportunity relating to eye strain in the online learning environment, because at the time, Praxis 1 was taught completely online. In fact, my whole first year was online because of the pandemic. After that, we wrote a sprint analysis just to debrief and reflect on what we did during the framing sprint. In the diverging sprint, we received a design brief from another team, and we were told to diverge for candidate designs that would address their opportunity. And we did this using diverging tools, and we were told to critique the tools as well. Super fun, could use some wacky tools and come up with some creative candidates. There was also a sprint analysis. For the converging sprint, we did a presentation instead of a formal written document. We did a critique of a bunch of designs that other groups had converged. So a bunch of so two teams had converged for designs. We were given those designs. Sorry, they diverged for designs, and we were told to take those designs and converge to a single recommendation, which is what we did. And the opportunity was for an ergonomic workspace for an office worker, I believe. We ended up talking about a mouse alternative and a keyboard alternative. And finally, there was the written exam, as I mentioned. So, given that I did Praxis 1 online, I'd like to, touch upon some of these things, some of the things I learned. So first of all, having to sit through many hours of lecture, studio, and team meetings, it's a lot. So I think overall, in order to not overwhelm yourself in online school, it's important that you take care of yourself and make the time to just not do anything. One of the funny things in this course was that the instructors really liked Microsoft Teams for some reason, but everybody else preferred Discord, like all the students did. That was pretty funny in my opinion. Uh, Another piece of advice I would say is when you're with yourself or with your team, you should always try to make time for not working. I typically like to live by the statement, um, what is it? Work hard, play hard. Um, yeah. And generally, it's important that you trust your teammates. This is something that was a little difficult for me at first because online group work makes it seem like you feel disconnected from your teammates. So to combat that, sometimes I would try to micromanage, but at the end of the day, your teammates will do their best work when you're not micromanaging them, which is something I learned. And I would also say when you're in a busy program like engineering, it's important that you work smarter and not necessarily harder. You can work hard, just make sure you're doing it efficiently. And some more tips for Praxis 1 and for my future design work, for my future self, if you're listening to this. You should definitely get to know your teammates. because it's just no fun if nobody knows each other, and it's not a really healthy environment if nobody knows each other. You should also really keep an open mind and not lock into your roles too quickly. You might feel comfortable in certain roles, but it might not be best for the team. It's also important that you take ownership of your work and that you're proud of it. Because if you're not proud of your work, then like, what are you even doing, right? When you're doing design work, especially team design work, you will be wrong sometimes, maybe a lot of the time. So just own up to it and move on. And this is a tip sort of specific to Praxis One, but really for any design work, just always ask for feedback from anybody, and ask for it honestly, and don't don't shy away from it. And finally, have fun, right? Praxis One is a really fun course. You get to do design with awesome people, with your awesome classmates. And for me personally, it was definitely one of the highlights of first year, given that everything was online. Being able to talk to people and to interact in this space was, a nice break from just like listening to people talk normally in online school. Anyways, that's it for my presentation. Thanks for sticking through all that, but I'd like to make some acknowledgements. So first of all, for the course, I'd like to acknowledge all the professors, Professor Sheridan, Irish, Kinnear, and Asare, for the course content, as well as their lovely instruction. I'd also like to shout out my studio TAs, Noosh and David. You guys were awesome. It was always a pleasure to be in your studio. I learned a lot. And I'd also like to acknowledge that I stole parts of my template for this presentation from uh, Kastner and De Silva. So yes, thank you for listening, and future me, if you're still here. Wow, I can't believe you're still listening. But anyways, thanks so much. Take care.